Pershy'sh Jerailmench. At first, Pershy liked pulling coaches for a change. He never needed his vacuum brakes on the meat plantation, but he was glad to have them now.
That railway was single track too,
He was telling Annie and Clarabelle as they were passing Mrs. Kindly's cottage.
but I still had to run round to the downhill end of my train whenever the line dropped.
Enough chatter, said Clarabelle.
We must reach the stations on time.
She and Annie were missing Thomas, and took their troubles out on Pershy. They were always running to time, but the two coaches were anxious, and this was beginning to stress Pershy out. They were approaching the tunnel before the junction station. They were just coming up to the level crossing when there was a bump in a latch, and Pershy came off the rails. The train stopped with a jolt.
What have you done?
Cried Clarabelle.
We're going to be late,
Wailed Annie.
It isn't my fault,
Protested Pershy. No one could quite say if this was true. David Lecter, who I'd hired from the meat plantation to drive and fire him, hadn't seen anything on the rails, but Pershy hadn't been running roughly. There didn't appear to be anything wrong with the rails, but there wasn't much time to investigate the cause of the derailment. Lecter ran to the signal box to telephone for help. Lizzie was trying to pacify the passengers who were complaining about the sudden jerk.
A tractor is coming to pull our engine back to the rails,
She said.
In the meantime, if you would please disembark and wait by the level crossing gates.
We'll catch the next bus back, shouted a passenger.
Did you hear that?
Groaned Annie.
Bertie and Caroline are going to take our passengers away. We failed,
said Clarabelle miserably.
We couldn't run the railway without the big engine's help.
Will you shut up? Snapped Pershy.
We just need to wait for the tractor and then we'll be on our way.
The minutes raced by. Passengers and crew looked up and down the road. There was no sign of Cathy, but there were no buses or taxis coming either. Only lorries. One of the passengers stood on the roadside giving a thumbs up to passing lorries. None of them stopped. Annie and Clarabelle moaned continually about running late. Persy tried to ignore them, but he began to feel more and more anxious himself. At last they heard the chug of a tractor, and everyone applauded when Cathy crawled into view.
Good,
Exclaimed Persy.
Get me back on the rails, please. I must move the coaches out the way first,
Said Cathy. Persy groaned. It seemed to take ages for Cathy to pull Annie and Clarabelle clear.
We really are going to miss the main line connection,
He sighed. Eventually, Cathy was chained to Percy's rear. The signaller called from her box.
The connection's due.
Persy sulked as Cathy tugged him backwards. He was soon near enough to the rails, and his crew used powerful jacks to lift him back onto the line.
Lucky for us you're such a small engine,
Said Lecter. Persy didn't feel lucky. To him it seemed like it took the whole day to jack him onto the rails. At last, Percy's wheels were on the rails, and he was recoupled to Clarabelle and Annie. He set off, whistling thank you to Cathy. He started slowly in case he derailed on the same spot again. Nothing happened, and he crossed the road without issue. He was soon storming through the tunnel and entering the junction station. There was no train there waiting for them.
We've missed the main line connection,
Said Persy sadly. The station master walked up as they entered the platform.
You needn't have rushed,
He said with a chuckle.
Edward's not arrived yet.
Persy, Clarabelle, and Annie could hardly believe it. The train was behind schedule, but it wasn't their fault. Edward, who was exhausted, had stalled with his coaches, and was later than Persy arriving at the junction.